So here's an example that's almost exactly like your homework, but is slightly different in that, well, this is from an old version of the book. And because it's from an old version of the book, the questions are actually slightly different. So they're asking the same thing, but since they're different questions, I'm not doing your homework for you. But this way I can actually help answer the questions for you, so you have an example of how to do your homework. So, exercise 27C, give the Latin for the relative pronoun in parentheses, and then read the sentence aloud and translate it. So, a good strategy to use for this is to first figure out what the sentence would mean without the relative clause, and to then translate the relative clause. So, number one, homo ad terram cecidit. Cecidit is another one of those words that you guys have a lot of trouble with. It's what's called a reduplicated perfect, from cado, cadere, cecidi casus, which means to fall. So, homo ad terram cecidit, a man fell to the ground. But let's find out more about the man. A man, qui per viem correbat, fell to the ground. I just said qui. I gave you the answer. But why is it qui? So, homo is what? It's a man. What case is homo? Well, the word is homo, hominis. So homo is the nominative singular. And since the word means man, it's probably masculine. Qui is masculine and singular. And you have to figure out what form of qui quae quod you would use in this sentence, right? If blank, if qui quae quod per viem correbat. So you have to imagine that who per viem correbat is its own sentence. So correbat, look at that, third person singular, right? And it's imperfect, and the verb is curro, currere, to run, was running through the street. Now we're talking about a man who was running through the street. So who has to be the same gender and number as homo, right? Homo, masculine singular. And the case is determined by correbat. In this case, it happens to be the same as homo. So it's qui, homo, qui per viam correbat ad terram cecidit. Because, let's look back at our chart. Gender, number, and case. Gender, masculine. Number, singular. Case, nominative, qui. I hope no one's too dizzy from that. I'm a little dizzy. Oops. Charger. Alright, now let's look at the second one. Ancilla, blank, crines negligenter pectebat, Aureliam vexabat. So we look at this again, and again, we translate the part of the sentence that doesn't require the relative clause first. So, Ancilla Aureliam vexabat. The slave girl was annoying Aurelia. Now, if you were tempted to translate Aurelia as the subject, well, it ends in an am, and it's a noun. It's accusative. Please don't make that mistake. It's one of the mistakes that starts to get on my nerves after a while. A little bit. Just a little bit. Okay. So the slave girl was annoying Aurelia. Now we're talking about which slave girl? The slave girl who crines negligenter pectebat. By the way, if they give it to you like this, it is kind of cheating because they tell you it's who and not whom. So you already know it's nominative. Just FYI. I wouldn't do that. I would just write qui quae quod in that little space so that you could figure out what it is. But, they're a little bit too nice. For them, it's just like, hey, plug in the form, Bureke Romani. But for me, I want you to actually understand what's going on. So, let's see why it's going on. So, we're talking about the slave girl, who crines negligenter pectebat. Pecto pectore. And crines is hair. So, the slave girl, who was negligently combing the hair, negligenter again is an adverb because of the ter at the end. Who, in that sentence, right, we make it a separate sentence. So, she was negligently combing the hair. So, who, which would become she if it were its own sentence, becomes the subject. So since it's the subject of that sentence, it's going to be nominative and singular. Sorry, because the subject of that sentence could be nominative. And we know the gender and number because the antecedent is ankila, which is what gender? A slave girl is probably feminine. What number? It's ankila, not ankilai. It's 1. So, singular, feminine, nominative is quae, Q-U-A-E. Quae. Tres. Homo obesus, whom servi portabant, librum legebat. What does obesus mean? Yeah, it's like saying fatus, although fatuous means stupid. So, a fat man, whom servi portabant, librum legebat. We take away whom servi portabant. We don't actually need that to translate the main idea of the sentence. So the fat man, librum legebat, was reading a book. But which fat man? It was the fat man whom servi portabant. Right? So, if this were its own sentence, whom servi portabant, so instead of whom, if we made that relative clause own sentence, it would be him. Right? Because servi portabant, what is portabant? NT, plural, servi, that's a good nominative plural for you. The slaves were carrying, right, English derivative, por, tubble. The slaves were carrying homo obesos. They were carrying him. Okay? In that sentence, him would obviously be the accusative, because the slaves were carrying him. So here, this has to be accusative. Homo obesus. And now what is the accusative? Singular. Masculine. Of Qui Quae Quod. That's right. Hope not too dizzy. Quem. So, homo obesus, quem servi portabant, librum legebat. The fat man, whom the slaves were carrying, was reading a book. Well, at least he was eating. Now, number 4. Aurelia, quem ancilae vexabant, speculum eripuit. Okay. Now, they tell you it's whom, again, so you know it's not going to be nominative. But I wouldn't give that to you. That's way too easy. But, either way, ancilai in this cannot be the object. It cannot be they were vexing the slave girls, okay, because then it would have to be accusative. So please don't make that mistake again, because that mistake makes me really sad. But, how do we do this? First, translate the part of the sentence that doesn't involve relative clause. Aurelia speculum eripuit. Aurelia, what'd she do? She eripuited it. She ripped away, she snatched away the speculum, the mirror. Aurelia, whom the slave girls vexed, or vexing, snatched away the mirror. So whom the slave girls were vexing was whom the slave girls were vexing. Snatched away the mirror. Okay. So in this case, the slave girls were vexing her, if that were its own sentence. Right? So the slave girls were vexing her. Okay? So you know it's going to be accusative. Right? Feminine, accusative, singular. Why is it feminine singular? Because Aurelia is feminine and singular. So, feminine singular accusative is quam. And now we go on to our first plural. Duo servi, whom Cornelia conspexit, per viam festinabat. So, you should know the drill by now. Take away the middle sentence, the middle part of the sentence, take away the relative pronoun clause, translate the rest of the sentence. Duo servi per viam festinabat. 2 slaves were hurrying through the street. Which 2 slaves? The 2 slaves whom Cornelia conspexit. The 2 slaves whom Cornelia saw. So if this were its own separate sentence, it would be Cornelia saw them. Since Cornelia is the subject, conspexit is saw, and them would be the accusative in that, right? The direct object, because it's what gets seen. Cornelia saw them. Understood? Yes? If you have questions, again, I'm still available by email while I'm in Washington. So Cornelia saw them. It's going to be accusative. Gender and number. Slaves are masculine. Number, servi, duo servi is plural. So it's going to be masculine, plural accusative, which is quos. Good job. Okay, number 6 is actually a little bit harder, just because, well, there are more things to think about, right? In this sentence, right, we have mater, philia, selas, and servi. So there are more nouns, right? But if you follow the same pattern, translate the rest of the sentence first and then translate your relative clause, then you can figure it out much more easily. So let's just not even look at the relative clause to start with. Let's look at brevi tempore, mater et filia in celas ascenderunt. So brevi tempore, those are both ablatives. Brevis, brevis, breve is a third declension adjective. Oh, we're going to talk so much about third declension adjectives soon. You're going to love it-ish. Tempore is a third declension ablative as well, except it's a noun. Remember, tempus temporis, my favorite third declension neuter. So those are both ablatives, and it's an ablative of time, helpful when you actually have the word time in there. So in a short time, mater et filia in celas ascenderunt. Ascenderunt, what English word comes from that? Yes, ascend. Very good, amazing. So ascend is to go up. So in a short time, mother and daughter climbed up onto the chairs. Which servi tulerunt? Servi tulerunt. Sorry, not tulerunt. So we take that sentence by itself. Which servi tulerunt? Okay. So servi tulerunt. I keep pronouncing that wrong. So ferro ferre tuli latum. Another one you guys have trouble with. They love those, don't they? Ferro ferre tuli latum is to bear, to carry, sometimes to talk. And here it says servi tulerunt. Tulerunt is clearly plural. It's pluperfect. So it would mean they had carried. Servi is also a nominative plural, which is a great subject for that. So then we have which. Now we look at the which they had carried. They, if the sentence is on its own, it would be they, the slaves, had carried those things, right? Because we're talking about a plural. So it's going to be accusative, right? Which the slaves had carried. It's going to be accusative. Celas, you can tell by the ending right away what the gender and number is, right? Gender is clearly feminine because we have the a, and the number is clearly plural because it's as. So, feminine, plural, and since the slaves carried them, right, it's going to be the accusative. So, what's going to be? Quas. Good? Any questions? You can send me an email if you have any questions, or you can try asking each other, or you can argue it back and forth. Number 7. Puella, to whom librum dedi erat Cornelia. Alright, well, I mean, since they tell you to whom, and you know puella is singular, you know it's going to be cui, because it's all three cuis. But let's do it the other way anyway. So, puella, to whom librum dedi erat Cornelia. So, translate the part of the sentence that doesn't involve the relative pronoun first. Puella erat Cornelia. The girl was Cornelia. Really tough Latin sentence. Ah, but let's learn more about the girl. We're talking about the girl to whom librum dedi. What is librum dedi? Do, dare, dedi? That one that you guys are so bad at. I mean, that one that you guys have so much trouble with. Do, dare, dedi, to give. So dedi, third principal part, so it's the perfect. What's that ending? The E? That's your first person perfect singular. I gave. Librum, the book. What case is librum? Liber libri. Librum is accusative singular. And now we want to say to whom. So I gave the book. If this were its own sentence, instead of to whom, it would be to, well, whom's talking about our puella? Okay. To her. Right? And her, she, the girl, right? What gender number is puella? Gender. It's a girl, so obviously feminine. The number is singular. So, since I'm giving the book to her, to whom is going to be in the dative. So what's the dative? Feminine, singular? Well, all three of our dative singulars are the same, so it's Qui with a C. So the girl to whom I gave the book was Cornelia. And finally, number 8, servus, whose dominus erat eratus, statime fugit. So, let's do it again. Same way. Servus statime fugit. The slave immediately a fugo. So fugo is where we get the word fugitive. Right? Someone who has to run away. Someone who runs away. So a fugo is to flee away. So the slave immediately flew away. But which slave? Ah, the slave whose dominus erat eratus. So, whose dominus erat eratus. If that were its own sentence, it would be, well, what's dominus erat eratus? The master. The master was angry. Now, if it's its own sentence and we add in the whose, it would be his master was angry. So, how do we do his as in whose, right? If it were its own sentence, it would be dominus eius erat eratus, but since it's part of this other sentence, and we want whose to refer back to servus, we're going to use the relative pronoun to relate this to this. So, the antecedent is servus. How do we make whose in the genitive be like servus? Well, servus is what gender? Masculine. Servus is what number? Singular. Do we care about the case? We don't, because relative pronoun is going to have a different case, or the same case, whatever the case may be. Ah, pun. Very pun. Whose is genitive, right? So we want genitive singular masculine, which is cuius. Okay, so before we move on to chapter 20,